You look at the world every single day and never question it. The sky is blue, grass is green, music sounds exactly as it should. The table beneath your hand feels solid. It all feels so immediate, so obvious, so undeniably real. But the truth is far more complicated. Because you've never actually experienced reality directly. Everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, everything you've ever touched, everything you've ever smelled, and everything you've ever tasted has only ever existed as an experience inside your brain. That sounds like the beginning of a conspiracy theory. It isn't. This isn't the Matrix. This isn't simulation theory. This isn't saying the universe is fake. The universe is real. The question is something much more interesting. How much of that reality ever reaches you? Because between the world outside your body and the world inside your mind, there is a surprisingly long journey. First comes reality itself, then your sense organs, then tiny electrical signals racing through your nervous system, then billions of neurons processing that information, and only then does a conscious experience appear. The world you experience isn't downloaded directly into your mind. It's built. And once you realize that, almost everything you thought was obvious starts becoming wonderfully strange. Take color. Look at something red. Maybe an apple, maybe a stop sign, maybe a drop of blood. It feels ridiculous to suggest that none of those things are actually red. After all, you can see the color. But here's the strange part. Objects don't contain color. An apple isn't storing redness inside its skin. Light from the sun contains many different wavelengths. When that light reaches the apple, some wavelengths are absorbed, others are reflected. The wavelengths reflected from the apple eventually enter your eyes. Your retina detects them, your brain interprets them, and only then does the experience you call red exist. The apple didn't send redness into your eyes, it reflected light. Your brain turned that light into color. In other words, red isn't something floating around in the universe. It's something happening inside you, and red is only the beginning. Visible light is an incredibly tiny slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. Beyond red lies infrared. Beyond violet lies ultraviolet. There are radio waves passing through your body right now. Microwaves, X-rays, gamma rays. The universe is overflowing with forms of light your eyes have never evolved to detect. Not because they aren't there, because your eyes were never built to receive them. Some snakes can detect infrared radiation, allowing them to sense the body heat of nearby prey. Many birds can see ultraviolet patterns on feathers that are completely invisible to you. Bees can see ultraviolet markings on flowers that act like landing guides leading them to nectar. The same flower that looks plain to you may appear covered in bright patterns to a bee. Same world, different eyes. Evolution didn't need to give you every wavelength. It only needed to give your ancestors enough information to survive. Vision isn't a window into all of reality. It's a carefully selected sample. Hearing works exactly the same way. Sound is simply vibration traveling through the air. Your ears detect only a narrow range of those vibrations. Dogs hear frequencies far above what you can hear. Bats navigate entire landscapes using ultrasound. Elephants communicate across enormous distances using sounds so low that humans often can't hear them at all. Imagine standing in a quiet park. To you, it might seem peaceful, almost silent. To a bat flying overhead, that same park is filled with echoes bouncing off every tree branch. To a dog, it's alive with whistles and squeaks you've never noticed. Same park, different worlds. And hearing isn't the only place where animals experience a completely different reality. Think about smell. You might walk through that same park and notice fresh grass, maybe flowers, maybe rain. Your dog experiences something entirely different. Every patch of ground is filled with information. Who walked here, how long ago, whether they were healthy, whether they were stressed, what they had been eating, whether another dog was male or female. Even why dogs greet each other by sniffing isn't random. They're gathering information your brain never even receives. The world your dog experiences isn't the world you experience. Not because the park changes, because evolution equipped each of you with different sensors for different problems. Now think about touch. Surely this one is different. When you place your hand on a table, you're actually touching it, right? Not exactly. At the microscopic level, matter doesn't behave like tiny solid marbles colliding together. The atoms in your skin don't simply merge into the atoms of the table. The electrons surrounding those atoms strongly resist being pushed into the same space. Your skin detects the resulting forces. Your nervous system sends electrical signals. Your brain translates those signals into the feeling you call touch. Even your own skin isn't made of atoms collapsing into one another. The sensation feels direct. The physics underneath it is anything but. Even taste follows the same pattern. Your tongue doesn't detect chocolate, or coffee, or strawberries. It detects chemicals. Your nose detects airborne molecules. Your brain combines those streams of information into something richer that you experience as flavor. That's why food suddenly seems bland when your nose is blocked. The chemistry reaching your body changes only a little. The experience inside your mind changes dramatically. Every one of your senses begins as physics. Photons, pressure waves, chemical molecules, mechanical forces, and ends as experiences in your brain. Color, sound, smell, touch, flavor. Reality arrives as physics. Your life is lived as experience. Evolution never tried to show you everything. It never needed to. Natural selection doesn't reward organisms for perceiving the entire universe. It rewards organisms that survive long enough to reproduce. So evolution built eyes that detected useful wavelengths, ears that detected useful sounds, noses that detected useful smells, skin that detected useful forces. Not perfect sensors, useful ones. Useful enough to find food, useful enough to avoid danger, useful enough to recognize family, useful enough to pass genes on to the next generation. That's why every species experiences the same physical universe differently. Each one is carrying a different set of biological sensors. Each one receives a different stream of information. Each one lives inside a different perceptual world. And biology doesn't stop creating variation once a species exists. Variation is one of biology's favorite ideas. No two zebras have identical stripes. No two tigers have identical patterns. No two humans have identical fingerprints. Even identical twins, who begin life from the same fertilized egg, don't develop identical fingerprints. Their bodies are astonishingly similar, but they are not perfect copies. Biology is constantly introducing tiny variations, which leads to a fascinating question. What if those tiny differences extended to perception itself? Imagine that, from birth, someone experienced wavelengths just a little differently from you. Not enough to notice anything unusual, not enough to struggle in everyday life. Just enough that what you experience as red, they experience in the way you would experience blue. They grow up pointing at blood and calling it red. They point at roses and call them red. Fire trucks are red. Stop signs are red. They learn exactly the same language you do. Their behavior is completely identical to yours, but inside, their private experience could be completely different. How would either of you ever know? You can't climb into someone else's mind. You can't compare experiences directly. Science can measure the wavelength entering both of your eyes. Science can measure activity inside your brains. But can science compare the feeling of your red with the feeling of theirs? Not today. Perhaps not ever. Philosophers call these private, subjective experiences qualia, not because they're mysterious, but because they're personal. If your experience of red can never be directly compared with mine, then something even bigger begins to emerge. You know you're conscious. You don't have to prove that to yourself. You experience your own thoughts directly. But every other mind you've ever encountered, you've known only from the outside. You hear words, you see expressions, you observe behavior. You infer that another conscious experience exists behind those eyes. And it's an incredibly reasonable conclusion. But you've never actually experienced someone else's consciousness. Consciousness itself is private. That doesn't mean you're the only conscious being. It means consciousness can only ever be experienced from the inside. Which raises another question. If your entire experience of reality is private, how does your brain build it in the first place? Before we can answer that, there's something even stranger you need to realize. The world you're experiencing isn't even happening now. Light doesn't travel infinitely fast. Neither does sound. Information has to move through the universe before it can ever reach you. When lightning flashes across the sky, the light reaches your eyes long before the thunder reaches your ears. Not because your ears are slow, because sound itself travels far more slowly than light. Even sunlight is delayed. The warmth on your face left the sun about 8 minutes ago. You're never seeing the sun as it is right now. You're seeing it as it was 8 minutes ago. The night sky is even stranger. Imagine a star that's 500 light years away. The light entering your eyes tonight began its journey 5 centuries ago. If that star disappeared yesterday, you wouldn't know for another 500 years. You could spend your entire life admiring its light without realizing the star itself was already gone. Looking into space isn't just looking across distance. It's looking back through time. Reality itself is already delayed before it ever reaches you. And then, your biology adds another delay. Photons strike your retina. Vibrations move tiny structures inside your ear. Pressure deforms your skin. Chemical molecules bind to receptors in your nose and on your tongue. Those receptors don't produce conscious experience. They produce electrical signals. Those signals travel through nerves. They arrive at different regions of your brain. They are processed, compared, integrated. Only then do you become consciously aware of what happened. By the time you experience the present has already moved on. So here's the mystery. If reality reaches you late, if your senses only capture a tiny fraction of it, and if your brain still needs time to process everything, why does the world feel so immediate? Why does it never seem delayed at all? Because your brain has learned something remarkable. It doesn't wait. It predicts. Imagine trying to catch a fast baseball. If your brain waited until every photon from the ball reached your eyes, then waited for your eyes to convert those photons into electrical signals, then waited for those signals to travel into your brain, and only then decided where the ball was, you'd miss almost every throw. Instead, your brain is constantly making educated guesses. It predicts where the ball will be. It predicts where your hand will need to go. It predicts where moving objects are heading before all of the information has even finished arriving. The same thing happens when someone is speaking. You aren't patiently waiting for every sound to reach your ears before understanding the sentence. Your brain is constantly predicting the next word, the next sound, even the next idea. That's one reason conversations feel effortless. Your brain is always trying to stay one step ahead of reality, not because prediction is more accurate, because waiting would often be too slow. But prediction alone can't explain everything. Sometimes your brain doesn't just predict information. Sometimes the information never arrives at all. And yet, you still experience a complete world. Take your eyes. Every eye has a blind spot, a literal hole in your vision. It's created by the place where the optic nerve leaves the retina. There are no light-detecting cells there. No image, no color, no information. If your eyes worked like cameras, you should constantly see a small hole floating in front of you. You don't, because your brain quietly fills it in. It studies the surrounding colors, the surrounding shapes, the surrounding patterns. Then it makes its best reconstruction of what probably belongs there. You almost never notice. Not because the blind spot disappeared, because your brain covered it up. There's another blind spot you've probably forgotten about. Your nose. Right now, it's sitting in the middle of your vision. Always has been. Light from your nose is constantly reaching your eyes, and yet, most of the time, you don't see it. Not because it vanished, because your brain decided it wasn't useful. Try focusing on it. You can, for a few seconds. Then it quietly fades into the background again. Your brain edits it out. Not because it's lying, because constantly seeing your own nose would make the world harder to navigate. Your eyes create another problem. They never stay still, even while reading these words. Your eyes are making tiny rapid movements called saccades. If your conscious experience reflected those movements exactly, the entire world would appear to shake dozens of times every second. It doesn't. Your brain stabilizes everything. It stitches countless tiny snapshots into one smooth, continuous world. Then there's color. Walk outside during sunset. The sunlight becomes warm and orange. Walk indoors beneath cool white lighting. The wavelengths reaching your eyes have changed dramatically. Yet a white sheet of paper still looks white. A red apple still looks red. Your brain constantly adjusts for changing illumination. Not because the light hasn't changed, because a stable perception is more useful than a perfectly literal one. Piece by piece, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Your brain isn't simply receiving reality, it's rebuilding it. Which brings us to one of the biggest technology debates of the past few years. Maybe you've seen those incredible smartphone photographs of the moon. Sharp craters, fine details, images that seemed impossible from a tiny phone camera. Then came the controversy. Critics argued that those details weren't really captured by the camera, that artificial intelligence was reconstructing parts of the image, adding detail the sensor never actually recorded. Supporters responded with a different argument. The software wasn't trying to fool anyone. It was trying to produce a more useful photograph. That debate quickly turned into a much bigger question. What is a photograph? To many critics, a photograph is supposed to preserve exactly what the camera sensor captured. Nothing more, nothing less. Like freezing a single moment in time. To many engineers and photographers, a photograph has a different purpose. It's supposed to represent the scene as faithfully and usefully as possible. If the moon appears as a blurry white blob because of the limitations of a tiny sensor, then reconstructing detail can produce an image that's far more useful to the person taking it. Neither side was arguing about the moon. They were arguing about the definition of a photograph. Should it preserve raw information, or should it preserve a useful representation of reality? There isn't a universally accepted answer. But evolution quietly faced a remarkably similar engineering problem millions of years before smartphones ever existed. Your eyes are sensors. Your ears are sensors. Your skin, your nose, your tongue. They're all sensors, just like a camera sensor. They collect limited information. Then your brain takes over. Unlike your phone, you can't open the settings and disable the post-processing. Evolution never gave you that option. Not because it wanted to deceive you, because raw sensory data often isn't the most useful way to experience the world. A blurry moon isn't very useful. A constantly visible nose isn't very useful. A hole floating in the middle of your vision isn't very useful. Evolution optimized your perception for usefulness, not literalness. There's another phenomenon that the brain sometimes create. Imagine losing an arm. The arm is gone. The nerves have been severed. The hand no longer exists. And yet, many amputees continue to feel that missing hand. They can feel individual fingers, an itch on a thumb, the position of a wrist, sometimes even intense pain. This is known as phantom limb syndrome. The sensation isn't imaginary. The experience is completely real. What's missing is the limb itself. The brain had spent years building a model of that arm as part of your body. Removing the arm doesn't instantly erase that model. So the experience can continue, even when the physical structure that once produced it is gone. For decades, neuroscientists have studied this phenomenon to better understand how the brain constructs our sense of the body. One of the most influential researchers is V.S. Ramachandran, whose mirror box therapy showed that changing the brain's visual information could sometimes relieve the pain of a phantom limb. It was a striking reminder that what you consciously experience isn't determined by the body alone. It's determined by how the brain interprets and updates the information it receives. If your brain can make you feel a hand that no longer exists, what else is it constructing every moment of your life? But now an uncomfortable question begins to emerge. If your brain is constantly constructing your reality, how much of what you experience was actually captured by your senses? And how much was quietly filled in afterward? Because sometimes those constructions are astonishingly accurate. Sometimes they aren't. You've probably heard someone sing the wrong lyrics to a song for years. Then one day, they discover the actual words. Suddenly, they can't believe their brain ever heard anything else. Optical illusions work the same way. The lines on the page never move. The colors never change. The image never shifts. Only your interpretation does. Memory behaves similarly. Many people imagine memories as recordings, like tiny videos stored somewhere inside the brain. They aren't. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds that memory, usually very accurately. Sometimes small details change. Occasionally, entire false memories can form. Then there's déjà vu, that strange feeling that you've lived this exact moment before. Scientists still debate the precise mechanisms behind it, but one leading idea is that it's a brief mismatch in how your brain processes familiarity. The moment feels remembered, even though it isn't. Even collective memory can be surprisingly unreliable. The Mandela effect has become famous because large groups of people confidently remember details that historical records don't support. That doesn't mean reality changed. It reminds us that human memory is reconstructive, not photographic. The remarkable thing isn't that your brain occasionally gets things wrong. The remarkable thing is how rarely it does, because reconstruction isn't a flaw. It's the strategy. One neuroscientist has become especially well known for describing perception in a way that captures this beautifully. His name is Neil Seth. He argues that perception is a controlled hallucination. At first, that sounds alarming. Hallucination? Really? But the adjective is the important word there. Controlled. Your brain is constantly generating its best model of reality. Then incoming sensory data continuously corrects that model. It's not inventing a fantasy. It's making predictions, testing them, correcting them, and updating them every fraction of a second. The outside world keeps the model anchored. Reality continually pushes back against the brain's expectations, which is why your experience usually matches the world remarkably well. Your brain isn't free to imagine anything it wants. Reality is constantly grading its homework. But there's one place where those corrections almost disappear. One place where your brain gets to build an entire world almost by itself. Every single night. Every night. Something extraordinary happens. You close your eyes. The outside world begins to fade. And yet, an entirely new world appears. You walk through places that don't exist. Speak to people who aren't there. Hear voices, feel fear, joy, curiosity. Sometimes you fly, sometimes you're falling, sometimes you're having a completely ordinary conversation. While it's happening, you almost never stop and ask, is any of this real? The dream simply becomes reality until you wake up. Then, almost instantly, the illusion disappears. The obvious question is, why? Why can your brain fool you so completely? The answer isn't because your brain suddenly became a better storyteller while you were asleep. It's because, awake or asleep, your brain has always been the only storyteller you've ever known. Imagine someone born completely blind. From the day they entered the world, one person has walked beside them every single day, describing everything: the color of the sky, the shape of a mountain, the face of a friend, the movement of the ocean, the stars above, every tree, every road, every smile, every danger. The blind person has never known another guide. They have never had another way of experiencing the world. One afternoon, the guide points toward a tree. It's a lime tree, he says. In reality, it's an orange tree. The blind person believes him, not because they're naive, but because they have no independent way to verify it. Another day, the guide leaves out unnecessary details, or simplifies a complicated explanation, or chooses words that are easier to understand. Perhaps the guide even says something intended to comfort the blind person during a frightening moment, not because the guide enjoys deception, but because in that moment those words are the most useful. The blind person trusts every description, because the guide isn't just describing reality, The guide is reality. At least, the only reality they've ever had access to. Your relationship with your brain is remarkably similar. Since the day you were born, every sight, every sound, every smell, every touch, every taste has reached your conscious mind through exactly one interpreter, your brain. You've never had a second opinion. You've never experienced the universe without it. So when you dream, the same guide that has interpreted reality for your entire life is now creating the experience itself. There isn't another observer sitting somewhere else inside your head asking, "Are you sure about this?" Because your brain has never needed to justify itself before. It's always been your only guide. Dreams don't feel real because your brain suddenly learned how to deceive you. They feel real because you're still trusting the same interpreter you've trusted every moment of your life. And that leads to perhaps the best way of thinking about perception. Maybe your brain isn't a camera. Maybe it isn't even a guide. Maybe it's a translator. The universe doesn't speak English. It doesn't speak Chinese. It doesn't speak colors or sounds or smells. It speaks photons, pressure waves, chemical molecules, mechanical forces, electrical signals. That's the raw language of reality. Anyone who has translated between very different languages knows something interesting. The most literal translation is often not the best translation. Imagine a phrase in one language that says, "The world is fear." A word-for-word translation might sound strange, confusing, or even completely wrong. But someone who understands the language knows the phrase is really expressing something closer to, "The world is full of wonder." The translator changes the words, not to lie, but to preserve the meaning. The goal isn't to preserve every symbol, it's to preserve the experience. Your brain faces a far more difficult challenge. It isn't translating between two human languages. It's translating between the language of physics and the language of consciousness. Photons become color, pressure waves become sound, chemical molecules become smell, mechanical forces become touch, dissolved chemicals become taste, electrical impulses become thoughts. That's what your brain has been doing every moment of your life. Not recording reality, translating it. Now think back to the moon photograph. The phone didn't reconstruct the moon because it wanted to fool you. It reconstructed the image because a blurry white circle wasn't very useful. It tried to produce a better representation of the scene. Your brain makes similar decisions constantly. It removes your nose from your vision. Not because your nose disappeared, because constantly seeing it would be distracting. It fills in your blind spot, not because the missing information doesn't matter, because leaving a hole in your vision would be less useful. It predicts where moving objects are going, not because prediction is always perfect, because reacting a fraction of a second sooner can mean the difference between catching a ball or missing it, between avoiding danger or becoming a victim. Even those moments when your brain gets things wrong, optical illusions, false memories, misheard lyrics, déjà vu, they aren't evidence that your brain is broken. They're evidence that reconstruction is an incredibly difficult job. Most of the time, the translation is astonishingly accurate. Occasionally, it isn't. And that's exactly what we'd expect from any translator working with incomplete information. Not every sentence has a perfect equivalent. Not every signal arrives complete. Not every prediction succeeds. But the system works remarkably well. Good enough to build civilizations, to write music, to discover mathematics, to walk on the moon, to ask questions like this one. So, is reality fake? No. Reality exists independently of you. The photons are real. The sound waves are real. The molecules are real. The forces are real. Your brain didn't invent the universe. It interprets it. Just as a translator doesn't invent a conversation. A translator makes it understandable. The world around you is real. The experience of that world is constructed. Those two ideas are not contradictions. They're partners. One cannot reach you without the other. Look around you again. The room feels immediate, solid, colorful, filled with sounds, textures, smells, objects, people. It feels like you're experiencing reality directly. But now you know the journey each of those experiences has taken. Across space, through your senses, into electrical signals, across billions of neurons, through prediction, correction, reconstruction, translation, all before a single conscious moment appeared. The world as you know it really does exist inside your head, not because reality is an illusion, not because your brain has been lying to you, but because the universe never arrives as colors, or sounds, or smells, or taste, or touch. It arrives as photons, pressure waves, chemical molecules, mechanical forces, and the only reality you can ever consciously know is the translation your brain has been faithfully constructing from that data since the day you were born.